It is easy to believe that the world is divided into those who have it all and those who have nothing. In a room full of the wealthy and the powerful, it is often easy to feel invisible, especially when your appearance does not align with the high standards of the elite. But sometimes, appearances can be deceiving, and what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about judgment and power. At a glamorous gala filled with glittering guests, one woman stood apart from the crowd. Her dress was simple, unassuming, and lacked the flashy embellishments you might expect from someone attending an event like this. She did not wear any designer jewelry or carry a handbag worth more than a small car. Yet, despite her modest appearance, she carried herself with a quiet confidence. Her name was Emma, and though she did not have the outward signs of wealth, she had something that the other guests could not see. As the evening wore on, Emma began to feel the sting of the judgmental eyes on her. The whispers of the guests around her were barely audible, but their condescending tone was unmistakable. They looked at her as if she did not belong, as though her presence in this exclusive setting was an error, a mistake. The opulent ballroom buzzed with the laughter and chatter of the rich and powerful, but Emma felt more alone than ever. The other guests did not know that Emma's life was far more extraordinary than they could ever imagine. She was not just another attendee at a gala. She was a woman who had built an empire of her own. Her accomplishments were not born of privilege, but of hard work, intelligence, and determination. But Emma had never been one to boast. She preferred to remain in the background, to let her actions speak for themselves. Little did the guests know that Emma's life was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would reveal just how wrong they were about her. The man who walked into the room next would change everything. Emma's husband. A man whose wealth and power were unmatched by anyone in the room, and his presence would soon expose the truth behind their assumptions and their cruelty. As the whispers grew louder, Emma remained composed, but the weight of their judgment began to take its toll. She had grown accustomed to the subtle looks of disdain, the kind that came from people who judged others based on their clothes, their status, and their wealth. Yet, something about tonight felt different. The air was thick with pretension, and Emma could feel it pressing against her. She glanced around the room, her gaze lingering on the men in their tailored suits and the women in their glittering gowns. They seemed so sure of themselves, so certain that they were the ones who belonged in this world. Emma, on the other hand, did not need their validation. She had spent years building her own company from the ground up. She had earned her place in the world, not by inheritance or luck, but by sheer will and determination. Yet, in moments like this, she could not escape the feeling that she was an outsider. And then, just as Emma was about to turn away from the stares and the whispers, the doors to the ballroom opened, and in walked a man who immediately commanded attention. He was tall, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire room. His every step was confident, purposeful, and despite the expensive suit he wore, he exuded a calm, understated power that no one could ignore. Emma's heart skipped a beat. It was him, her husband, Michael. For the first time that evening, the room fell silent. The guests who had been so quick to judge Emma now found themselves staring, not at her, but at the man who had just entered. Michael's gaze swept across the room, briefly meeting Emma's eyes before he made his way toward her. His expression was calm, but those who knew him could see the faintest flicker of anger in his eyes. He knew what had been happening, and he was about to make sure that everyone else did too. Emma stood tall, her posture straightening as she met his gaze. She did not need to speak. Michael knew exactly what to do. As he approached her, the room seemed to shrink, the once bustling ballroom now feeling strangely small. Every eye was on them as he reached her side, his hand gently resting on her shoulder in a protective gesture. The transformation was about to begin. The power dynamic had shifted, and the guests who had mocked Emma would soon realize just how wrong they were. What they did not know was that Michael was not just another wealthy man in a room full of billionaires. He was the owner of the very company that hosted this gala, and he had come here tonight not just for the event, but to teach those around him a lesson they would never forget. The shift in energy was palpable. The guests, who moments ago had looked down on Emma, now stood in stunned silence as Michael made his way to her side. His presence commanded respect, and his calm, unwavering demeanor sent a message that needed no words. The ballroom, once filled with laughter and idle chatter, was now hushed, as if everyone in the room was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Michael stood tall beside Emma, his hand still resting on her shoulder, a silent show of support that spoke volumes. He turned his gaze toward the crowd, his eyes scanning the room methodically, as if he were assessing each person's worth, not based on their clothes, their wealth, or their social standing, but on the character they had shown in that very moment. "Is there a problem here?" Michael's voice broke the silence. It was deep, measured, and filled with authority. His words echoed through the room, carrying with them the weight of someone who knew exactly what he was capable of, and how much power he truly held. The head of the event staff, who had been one of the most vocal in questioning Emma's place in the gala, fumbled to respond. "No, sir, just a small misunderstanding," she stammered, her once confident posture now crumbling under the weight of Michael's stare. The air seemed to thicken as the realization set in. This man was not just a guest at the event. He was the man who owned the very company hosting it. Michael stepped closer to Emma, his voice now low enough for only the nearby guests to hear. "This seat," he gestured to the chair beside Emma, "was purchased specifically for her." He spoke as though the answer was obvious, his words slicing through the tension in the room like a knife. The guests, who had once whispered behind Emma's back, now shifted uncomfortably. The same people who had mocked her were now looking away, pretending not to notice the billionaire standing beside her. Some of them, too proud to apologize, instead busied themselves with their phones, suddenly far more interested in the latest notifications than in the woman they had so carelessly dismissed. Michael's gaze now turned to the staff, who were still standing awkwardly in the corner of the room, their previous arrogance gone. "I suggest you all rethink your judgments," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "The way you treat people, based on nothing more than their appearance, is not acceptable." He turned to Emma, his eyes softening as he spoke directly to her. "You do not need to explain yourself to anyone," he said, his voice gentle, but carrying the weight of years of hard work and success behind it. Emma, still taken aback by the sudden shift in dynamics, nodded in appreciation. Michael had made it clear that no one, not even the wealthiest or most powerful people in the room, had the right to diminish her worth. And just like that, the power had shifted. Emma was no longer the woman being looked down upon. The people who had dismissed her as insignificant were now the ones left questioning their own assumptions, realizing just how wrong they had been. The lesson was simple. Wealth and status are not determined by how you dress or who you know. They are defined by the integrity and strength of your character. The atmosphere in the ballroom was electric, charged with an energy that hadn't been there just moments before. The same guests who had once looked down on Emma now found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about wealth and status. Michael's quiet but powerful intervention had not only shifted the power dynamic in that room, but it had also exposed the shallow judgments of those around them. As the guests shuffled awkwardly, trying to avoid eye contact with the couple, Michael turned his attention back to Emma, a small, knowing smile on his lips. "I'm proud of you," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. It wasn't the words themselves that mattered. It was the way he said them, with so much genuine affection and respect. He had always believed in her. even when the world had not. Emma, still reeling from the unexpected confrontation, met his gaze and nodded. She had always known that Michael had her back, but seeing him stand up for her so publicly made her heart swell with gratitude. For a moment, she forgot about the room full of judgmental eyes and the whispers that had stung her so deeply just a short time ago. With him by her side, she knew she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The flight of steps leading to the stage was now empty. The event staff had retreated, no longer sure of how to proceed. They had been expecting someone who was supposed to be a guest, someone without influence, someone they could dismiss with just a look. But now they found themselves standing in the presence of someone who owned not just the event, but everything that came with it. As the silence lingered, Michael spoke again, his words quiet but laced with authority. "I trust you will all reconsider how you treat people in the future. Wealth is not about appearances or titles. It is about how we carry ourselves, how we treat others, and how we build what matters." The words landed heavily in the room, and with them, the air of superiority that had once dominated the atmosphere began to lift. One by one, the guests who had been so quick to judge Emma slowly started to shift, their posture softening, their gazes lowering in realization. They understood now. Michael's words weren't just a reminder to Emma, they were a challenge to everyone in the room. For the first time that night, Emma felt at peace. She didn't need their approval. She never had. As Michael continued to speak with the staff, his calm yet firm presence reasserting control over the room, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The lesson they had learned was simple. Dignity cannot be bought, and worth cannot be judged based on external appearances. In the end, Emma and Michael did not need to prove anything to anyone. They had already proven themselves through the years of hard work, determination, and love that had built their lives. The guests may have mocked her, but it was clear that Emma was the one who truly belonged in this world, whether they recognized it or not. As the evening drew on, the atmosphere in the ballroom gradually returned to normal, though it would never quite be the same. The whispers that had once filled the room with judgment had now been replaced by a more subdued, reflective quiet. Guests who had earlier glanced at Emma with disdain now found themselves stealing cautious glances her way, some offering subtle nods of respect that went unnoticed by her. They had learned a lesson they would not forget in a hurry. Emma and Michael moved to the edge of the room, where they could finally enjoy some semblance of peace. The contrast between the earlier tension and the serene calm that now surrounded them was stark. Michael, ever the quiet powerhouse, remained calm and collected as he spoke with a few of the other influential guests. Emma, for her part, felt a profound sense of gratitude towards him for standing by her, for showing the world what true strength and integrity looked like. But as they conversed, something in the back of Emma's mind continued to bother her. The guests' changed demeanor, the sudden respect they had begun to show her. Did it mean anything? Or was it all just a fleeting moment brought on by Michael's revelation of his power? She had lived most of her life outside of the spotlight, content to stay out of the limelight and build something meaningful from the ground up. But as she looked at the faces around her now, she wondered if their respect for her was truly earned, or if it was just a result of Michael's influence. "Are you all right?" Michael's voice broke through her thoughts, and Emma looked up to meet his gaze. There was a hint of concern in his eyes, as if he could sense her inner turmoil. "I'm fine," Emma replied, her smile faint but genuine. "It's just, I've spent my whole life building something on my own, and I don't want to be defined by who I'm married to. I want people to see me for who I am, not just as Michael's wife." Michael's expression softened, and he reached out to gently take her hand. "You don't need to worry about that. Everyone who matters already sees you for who you are. Tonight, they learned that. They saw your strength, your dignity. That's what truly matters. Emma nodded, but the feeling of discomfort remained. Not because of anything Michael had done, but because of what others had chosen to see. Or rather, not see before. It wasn't about status or money. It was about respect. And she realized that some people would only offer that respect when it was forced upon them. Others, however, had come to understand that respect could not be bought. It was earned. Tonight, Emma had earned it. As they made their way to the exit, Emma felt lighter than she had in hours. She had been tested in a way she never expected, but through it all, she had emerged stronger, more resolute. Michael's support had been unwavering, and it had given her the strength to stand up for herself, to demand the respect she deserved. The lesson they had both learned was simple. Wealth and power may open doors, but it is character, dignity, and how we treat others that truly defines who we are. Emma had always known her worth. Tonight, the world had learned it too. The drive back to their private estate was quiet, the city lights flashing by as Emma sat next to Michael, her thoughts still racing. The weight of the evening's events hadn't quite settled, and she found herself replaying the moments over and over in her mind. Michael's actions had been powerful, but it was her own strength that had shone through. For the first time in a long while, Emma realized that she didn't need anyone's approval to know her worth. She had known it all along. When they arrived at the estate, Michael led her into their home, a sanctuary that had been a place of peace for them both. As they entered the living room, Emma paused, looking out the window at the sprawling garden that stretched into the distance. The soft glow of the moon bathed everything in a serene light, making the whole world feel calm again. Michael followed her gaze and then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You handled yourself with grace tonight," he said, his voice sincere. "I'm proud of you." Emma turned to him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I couldn't have done it without you, but you didn't have to do what you did. I wanted to prove myself on my own." "I know," he replied, his tone thoughtful. "But sometimes it's important for others to see that strength too. The way they treated you, it wasn't right. And I couldn't stand by and let them think they could get away with it." His words sank in, and Emma realized that he wasn't just defending her because he loved her. He was doing it because he believed in her. He had seen something in her that the world had failed to notice. Her dignity, her integrity, her ability to stand tall even in the face of adversity. Those were the qualities that made her truly exceptional. Not the clothes she wore, or the company she kept. As she sat down on the couch, Michael joined her, taking a seat beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, letting the weight of the evening settle. Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't expected to find after such a turbulent night. The world outside might have judged her, but Michael had shown her that her true worth was beyond their comprehension. "I've always known who I am," Emma said quietly, breaking the silence. "But tonight I learned something new. It's not about what others see. It's about what we believe about ourselves. The world may try to label us, but we are the ones who define who we are." Michael smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "Exactly. And now, everyone who doubted you tonight knows exactly who you are." As the night wore on, Emma felt the last remnants of doubt slip away. The judgments of the rich, the powerful, and the privileged no longer mattered. They had learned their lesson. Emma's worth was not something that could be defined by appearances. It was rooted in her character, in her actions, in the way she carried herself with dignity, regardless of how others treated her. The next morning, as the sun rose over the estate, Emma stood in front of the mirror, taking one last look at herself. She wasn't the woman they had mocked at the gala. She wasn't just Michael's wife, she was Emma. Strong, capable, and worthy of respect. And now, the world knew it too. The lesson had been learned, not just by the guests at the gala, but by Emma herself. True power wasn't about wealth or status or who you knew. It was about the strength within, the integrity you held, and how you treated others, regardless of their appearance. And in that moment, Emma knew she had already won, without a single word. A few weeks passed after the gala, but Emma still found herself reflecting on that night. The evening had marked a turning point not only in how she was perceived by others, but also in how she saw herself. The lesson she had learned was simple yet profound. True worth cannot be defined by external markers of wealth or status. It is defined by the strength of your character, your actions, and the way you treat others. The truth was, she had always known that. But sometimes it took an experience like that to make it crystal clear. Emma's decision to not rely on Michael's power to defend her, despite the temptation to do so, had solidified her own sense of self-worth. She had chosen to stand up for herself, not with grand gestures but with quiet dignity and confidence. And in the end, that was what had earned her the respect of everyone around her, including Michael. As they sat together one morning over breakfast, Michael looked at her, his gaze full of admiration. "You've changed, you know," he said, setting his coffee down. "I see a new strength in you." Emma smiled softly, looking at him across the table. "I think I always had it. I just didn't realize how much of it I was holding back." Michael chuckled, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "Well, I'm glad you found it, because now, not even the most arrogant people can ever make you doubt yourself." Emma nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. Michael had always believed in her, even when she hadn't believed in herself. He had given her the space to grow, to learn, and to become the woman she had always wanted to be, confident, strong, and unapologetically herself. Their conversation shifted to other matters, but Emma's thoughts kept drifting back to that night at the gala. She had proven to herself, and to the world, that she didn't need anyone's approval. Not the guests who had mocked her, not the staff who had doubted her, and not even the billionaire powerhouses who thought they could define her worth. She had built her own legacy, earned her own place in the world, and earned the respect of those who mattered most to her. Emma knew that her journey was far from over, but she also knew that whatever came next, she would face it with the same quiet strength and unwavering dignity that had carried her through the hardest moments of her life. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt completely at peace with who she was, no longer defined by the opinions of others, but by her own unshakable belief in herself. The world had learned its lesson, but more importantly, so had she. She was worthy, not because of what she wore or who she knew, but because of who she was. And that would never change. With a sense of calm certainty, Emma leaned back in her chair, smiling at Michael, knowing that the story they had just lived would be a reminder of her strength for years to come. It wasn't the grand moments that defined a person. It was the quiet, steady ones that made all the difference. And as Emma looked forward, she knew this was only the beginning of her true journey, one where her worth would be measured by her character, not by the judgment of others.